you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once. I am one of those.
Hi, I'm anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, and you're listening to episode 6 of the Anarcology podcast. This episode is entitled Dembocracy and Freedumb. So to recap what we've already gone over, we have deconstructed how potty training, school, and capitalism are sites for the infliction of trauma. And we are now getting to one of my favorite topics, the institution of government and how government is trauma. But even more than trauma, I would suggest to you that just the very belief in government and its legitimacy is a kind of delusion. It's not something you're going to find in the DSM. You probably should, but it isn't in there. And so all of the arguments I'm about to make are also contained in my book, Ohio, which is available from lbcbooks.com or wherever good books are stolen. So let's get into government. I would suggest to you that it doesn't matter what kind of government we're talking about or who's running that government. It can be a monarchy, or it can be a dictatorship like Mussolini or Hitler. And it could be, I don't know, something like the liberal democracies you find in the West. Whatever it is, it's a government. And it doesn't matter who's running it. It could be somebody good. It could be somebody bad. Government is still government. Now, for my purposes, I would suggest to you that government is the right to rule. Wherever you have the perception of a right to rule, you have a government. If you don't have the right to rule, if you have the person who's being ordered around saying, "Who the fuck are you?" then you don't have a government, and you don't have hierarchy. So the funny thing about government is this, that anybody you ever talk to hates it. Even the people who are in it hate it. So everyone hates it, but everyone thinks we need it. We need the thing that we hate. And if you were to probe and explore this a little deeper as to what we need government for, it typically comes down to about 3 things. People think we need government for roads and for schools and for safety or security. So let's unpack that for a second here. Roads first. I don't know that we need government for roads. I think roads are kind of like a path, and humans have had paths for a long time. You know, wherever people dwell, they need to get water, and they usually walk the same path to the water, and they get a worn spot in the ground, right? It's pretty much that fucking simple. So a road is just taking some asphalt and putting it where the path was. I think a monkey on a rock can accomplish that. We're not talking about, rocket surgery. You and I, if we live in the same community and we go to the same places, we can get together and find somebody who knows how to work some asphalt, and we can put a fucking road down. I don't think we need a government for that. I think what really happens is that government needs us to think we need government for roads. And that way the government can decide where the road goes. The government gets to put the road where the government wants it instead of where we need it. So that's roads. Second thing is schools. If you think we need government in order to establish schools, you need to go back to a previous episode where we talk about schools. Schools are fucked. Schools are terrible. Schools are sites of trauma. Um, I don't think we need government for schools. I think government needs us to think we need government for schools so that the government can decide what we learn. And one of the principal things we learn in school is that we need government. Yeah, funny, huh? The third part of this is safety and security. I don't know how safe and secure I feel with the government in charge of my safety and security. Keep in mind, right now, as I'm recording this, this is February of 2023. I'm recording Final Straw segments on the Final Straw radio show, and we are um, uh, reading the names of everyone killed by police in 2022. In order to do this, we have so many episodes where I'm just reading the names of the people killed by police. We start this at the beginning of the year. I'm going to be doing this according to the schedule. I'm looking on the calendar right now until April 9th. It's going to take me almost a third of the year of radio segments reading names of people killed by the cops last year. So how safe and secure are we really when we pay our taxes to a government that buys uniforms and guns and arms a group of people who turn around and kill us? I don't feel safe. So roads, schools, security, I think those are things that human beings can provide for themselves better than strangers can provide it for them. So I don't think we need those things. Now, people will still argue that we need government. The argument is that people are messy. People can't be trusted to run their own lives. People run stoplights. They have sex with each other's spouses. They get drunk and they dive into fountains. This is what people do. And we can't trust these people to run their own lives. We can't have people running stoplights and having sex with each other's spouses and diving into fountains. We need somebody to stand at to sit in the car by the stoplight and stop people. We need a court set up to adjudicate what happens to people who have sex with each other's spouses. We need somebody to put a fence around that fountain and put no diving signs up. That's what government's there for, because we're messy. Poor deluded hierarchs, they usually say I'm utopian when I tell them we don't need government. You know, utopian, that I think human beings are better than they really are. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think I think humans are better than they are. I mean, I think humans run stoplights, have sex with each other's spouses, and dive into fountains. I know that they do. In fact, I would say I believe humans are more messed up than even the poor deluded hierarchs think they are. I think we have a whole population of socket lickers and sun gazers. I think most of us are splashing around in the shallow end of the gene pool. I really do. And I think we have proof of that. I think the culture we've set up is a kind of idiot factory, and we're just pumping these idiots out. So I don't think I'm utopian at all. In fact, I would argue that poor deluded hierarchs who believe in government are far more utopian than I am. And here's why. Poor deluded hierarchs believe that if we take all these people we can't trust to run their own lives and we give them ballots to cast a vote for somebody who is going to hold power and accumulate all this collective power into the hands of a few people and have access to nuclear codes, that somehow That's a better solution than letting all these people run their own lives. Really? So we're going to take all these people who dive into fountains and have sex with each other's wives and run stoplights. We're going to give them ballots and let them decide who they think should be in charge. And who is it that they're going to vote for? Well, somebody who resonates with them. Somebody who is, a fountain diver, just like they are. And so we're going to elect fountain divers to run everybody's lives. How is that a better solution than just letting people do what they want to do? I can't figure that out. Nobody can show me the math on that. And by the way, this is why we have people like George W. getting elected and having access to nuclear codes. Democracy. The idea that if we let people who are too fucked up to run their own lives vote, that we're going to end up with a better solution. So that's a delusion as far as I'm concerned, because we keep doing this year after year, decade after decade, century after century, and we keep expecting a different result than the results we've already gotten. Makes no sense to me. And by the way, while we're on this topic of government, where does even this right to rule come from? Because government is the right to rule. It's the right to rule and the rest of us assuming a duty to obey. Those two things correspond to each other. And without them, you don't have government. You just have somebody yelling and screaming and giving orders. Like that chef on TV who keeps pounding people's food with his fist. He's yelling and screaming, but he's not a government. You only have a government when you have a right to rule. Well, where does it come from? It has to exist in order for government to be real, in order for government to be valid. I don't know, but even at the founding of the government that assumes to rule me, there's a document that says all men are created equal. And it's very patriarchal that way. It mentions men. It should say all people. So let's just assume that that's what they meant, even though the guy who wrote that document owned slaves. So clearly he didn't mean what he was saying. But okay, all men are created equal. So this idea that we're all created equal, it means that we all have the same rights. So if you and I are equal, and we're standing here face to face, what gives me the right to tell you what to do? And what gives you a duty to obey me? In order for one of us to have a right to rule and for the other to have a duty to obey, you actually need to have two subspecies of humans. You have to have one subspecies of human who has the right not just to rule self, but to rule self and someone else. And you need a wholly separate subspecies of human who has lost or relinquished the right to rule even self. And that's what you have to have in order to have someone with a right to rule and another to have a duty to obey. So think about this. Think about this scenario that you've just set up a business and, I don't know, maybe a bakery, maybe a 7-Eleven, some sort of convenience store in a neighborhood. And you got these folks who just walk in, they're sagging their pants, and they look kind of mean. They've got sunglasses. You can see that they're packing heat. They're armed. And you've heard rumors that at least one of these guys has shot somebody before. And they come into your business and they tell you that you're in their turf and that you're going to have to pay them protection and that you're going to have to run your business according to their standards and what they want to see you do. And if you don't run the business according to their standards, they're going to drag you off somewhere and do some terrible shit to you. How would you feel about that? Is this something you want to see happen if you're a business owner? If you've got a shotgun underneath the counter, are you going to pull that shotgun on them and tell them to get the fuck out of your store? I would suggest that you probably would. You would probably feel pretty insulted by this. Now, let's just change this a little bit. Instead of sagging their pants, they're wearing blue uniforms. And they've got metal stars on their chests. Instead of driving sports cars, they have a sedan with "to protect and to serve" over the fender. And they come in, and instead of saying that you're in their turf, they say, "You're inside of our jurisdiction." They use jurisdiction instead of turf. And instead of saying you're going to have to pay protection, they call it taxes. And instead of saying you're going to have to do what we tell you to do, or we're going to drag you away and do terrible shit to you, they tell you that you have to abide by certain government codes, or else you'll be arrested and prosecuted and jailed. You know what you're going to do? Chances are, if you're in the United States, you're going to offer them some free coffee. Yeah. It's the same gang, just slightly different. It's the same protection racket. It's the same demand. But suddenly, the people who have stepped into your business have a right to rule. It's not just a gang anymore. They have some sort of officiality that you recognize. And so you assume a duty to obey. For both scenarios, it's the same bullshit. I would suggest to you that it's delusional to see the police any differently than you see any other gang. I would suggest that it's delusional to believe that anybody can have that right to rule. Now, the difference in all of this, as core delusional hierarchs will tell you, is that in the second scenario, you have given consent to be governed. You've given consent. Now, there's a number of ways that they will say you've consented to this. They'll say first that you've stepped foot into the jurisdiction where the government exists, and therefore you are accepting the duty to obey and the right to rule. They'll say that. They'll say that you've paid taxes, you've used the roads and the schools, and by doing all of this, you have consented. Now, I go over these arguments in my book, Ohio, which is available from lbcbooks.com or wherever good books are stolen. And I won't go over all of those arguments. I'll just deal with this idea of the consent to be governed. There's no fucking way you can ever consent to be governed. To be governed is to be compelled. Now, government does a lot of things. It issues a lot of rules and laws. If it's telling you to do something you want to do, and it's something that you would do already anyway, then you're not being compelled and you're not being governed. You're just doing what you normally do anyway. It's only being governed and compelled when it's a thing you don't want to do. So if you normally wouldn't wear a seatbelt, and the government tells you you must, you're being compelled. You're being governed. If you normally wore your seatbelt anyway, That's not compulsion. They're only telling you to do what you normally did. You see the difference? And so the only time you're really being governed is when you're being compelled. Nobody can consent to being compelled. Compulsion is by virtue of compulsion, not consent. It's something you don't want to do. Nobody can ever rationally say, I want you to make me do what I don't want to do. You can never consent to be governed. It's not possible. You can't consent to be governed any more than you can consent to be compelled, any more than you can consent to being raped. Rape and consent are the two opposite things, just as consent and being governed are two opposite things. So whenever somebody tells you, well, but you have consented to government, that is absolutely not true. In fact, when you vote for our governor or for our president, and you vote for some guy and he gets elected, I didn't consent to be governed by your guy. I didn't vote for him. I voted for somebody else. Or perhaps I didn't vote at all. Perhaps I want no government. I didn't consent to that guy governing me. So what you have in democracy is not consent to be governed. What you have is the tyranny of the majority. They get what they want, or at least what they think they want, right up until this guy starts serving his golf partners instead of serving the constituency. But the majority gets what they think they want, and everybody else gets shafted. So that's compulsion, and nobody's consented to that. You're stuck with that. You don't get a choice. Now, beyond this, there is another level to this delusion that hierarchs have, and that's the delusion of progress. They will say we need hierarchy because over the last 8,000 years, hierarchy has brought us progress. Now, progress indicates to me that things are getting better, not getting worse. So I have to ask, are things getting better? Let's think about that. Let's unpack that for just a minute. It isn't that things are getting bigger. Progress is not about things getting bigger or more complicated. Life is more complicated. Things are more complex. But are they better? I can tell you this, 8,000 years ago, they didn't have road rage. They didn't have what we now categorize as mental illness, like we have it now. They didn't have the suicide rates we have. They didn't have the mass pandemics that we have because of the size of our population and how packed in we are. They didn't have all this. And I can tell you they didn't have war like we have it. Think about this. In just the Russian front in World War II, 10 million people lost their lives to war in a period of 5 to 7 years, maybe, tops. You didn't have that many people 8,000 years ago losing their lives in a war. And we're just talking about a space the size of New Jersey. We're not even talking about the entire fucking war. We're just talking about one war in one spot in a specific period of time. 10 million deaths. 8,000 years ago, if you had one catastrophic event that killed 10 million people, it would have been the extermination of the entire human race. So we're talking about the exponential expansion of human suffering that has happened over the course of the last 8,000 years. And when we look at the situation we're in now, that hierarchy and government has gotten us to, the situation that we have, we're looking at very possibly omnicide. We're looking at possibly the death of everything on the planet. And hierarchy is the principal machinery that has driven our social structures and our social organization in order to reach that. Now, another way to look at this progress thing that poor delusional hierarchs will tell us we have, think about this. Congress continues to pass laws. When do they think they'll be done? What I mean is, when do we think they will finally have the laws right? So when do we get to the point where Congress says, hey, we have all the laws we need, we've got it just right, and we're going to quit now? Never. They're never going to do that. They're never going to stop having a crisis that they have to continually address. They're going to play whack-a-mole forever because they're going to create new problems in order to solve new problems in order to keep getting paychecks. That's what they do. Let's take the U.S. Institute of Peace. The U.S. Institute of Peace is a government agency. Their job is to work toward world peace. So I wrote them once, and I asked them, what's your timeline? When do you think we're going to get there? And they wrote me back and said, what are you, fucking nuts? We don't have a timeline for that. I mean, world peace? That's just way too goddamn complicated. So my question for them was, well, what are you doing? Why do you have these jobs? This is way over your heads. You should all be fired. We have a U.S. Institute of Peace, and you don't even have a timeline for when you can accomplish your goal. Clearly, you're underqualified. You see what I'm getting at here? So what we have is a system in place where the people in charge are constantly making new rules and new laws, where they're taking on new projects, and they have no idea when they're ever going to complete what they're doing. Is this progress? Progress toward what? We're not experiencing progress. To think that this is progress is very, very delusional. To think that this is progress is hopelessly optimistic. It's almost like a test pilot who's in a plane that's on fire and the wings have fallen off and he's plummeting toward Earth. And the air traffic asks him, how are things going? And he says, well, so far so good. Yeah, that's us. That's hierarchy. The world is getting real big in the windshield right now. We're plummeting. So far, so good. I mean, optimistically, we say, hey, it's a great view from here, right? But no, this is not progress. This is just the opposite of progress. Things are getting more complicated, but things are not getting better. We can look out our window and see that things are not getting better. And therefore, to keep grabbing onto this thing we call hierarchy, and to keep thinking that this is a solution to the problem, that more of the problem is a solution to the problem is kind of like grabbing the hot end of a curling iron and expecting the pain to go away. It's not. It's actually the problem. So, that is also government a site of trauma. Because, remember, under anarchology, our study is freedom and the forces that oppose freedom and how to obtain freedom. Well, anytime you have something that's subjecting you to this, that's subjecting you to what is a delusion, a complex delusion, that can't be good. That cannot be good for you. So, this really is a kind of Kool-Aid cult hierarchy. And no Kool-Aid cult is in your best interest. It's trauma. So, I would like to close off with an analogy that I've read from Daniel Quinn, and this is based on something that he presented in one of his books, and it goes something like this: that you have the clock people, and the clock people have existed for a long time, and their world is the interior of this giant machinery. And from the time that they're born, they sit over in the corner, and old grandmother culture whispers into their ears and tells them the stories of the clock people. And they go to school, and the teacher asks them what they want to be when they grow up, and they raise their hands. And some of them want to work on the clock. And some of them want to be medical personnel who help treat the injuries of people who are working on the clock. And some of them want to be engineers to help design the clock. And everyone sees their identity in relationship to this clock. And everyone believes that once this clock is made, everything's going to be fantastic. And so, at some point in your life, you're walking around, and somebody comes up to you, and they seem really nervous, someone you know, and they're sweating. And they say they really need to talk to you because they've been thinking, and the more they think, the more they look around, and the more they look around, and the more they see, the more they think. And they take you around inside this machinery that you've always accepted for what it was. And they start pointing to the things that you've always accepted for what they were. Only this person has a whole new explanation for all of these components you're looking at. And when he gets done, he says, I'm really scared right now because I don't think we're making a clock. I think we're making a bomb. And if we don't stop, and if we don't wake people up, and if we don't find a way to abandon this project, we're all going to die. And so, I urge you to take a look at the systems that you're living in right now. Take a good look at these things and ask yourself what you're looking at. Because I would suggest to you that what you're looking at is a bomb. And if we don't stop, and if we don't wake people up, and if we don't abandon this project, we're all going to die. In the next episode of Anarcology, we're finally going to get to the topic of freedom. And we're going to define it. And we're going to talk about what it really is. And then we're going to discuss how all of these forces we've already discussed are contrary to real freedom. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain from the Super Duper Uber Mega Ultra Hyper Turbo Multi Maxi Max in Youngstown, Ohio. If you're listening, you are the resistance.